Have workers become the bosses? That's what Gurner Group founder Tim Gurner seems to believe, and he told Financial Review Property Summit workers that this is a problem that needs to change.
I think the problem that we've had is that we have people decided they didn't really want to work so much anymore through COVID, and that has had a massive issue on productivity. Tradies have definitely pulled back on productivity. They have been paid a lot to do not too much in the last few years, and we need to see that change. We need to see unemployment rise. Unemployment has to jump 40–50% in my view. We need to see pain in the economy. We need to remind people that they work for the employer, not the other way around.
Wow, unemployment has to jump 40–50%. What an admission. Gurner also said we have to hurt the economy to end the arrogance among workers.
There's been a systematic change where employees feel the employer is extremely lucky to have them, as opposed to the other way around. So it's a dynamic that has to change. We've got to kill that attitude, and that has to come through hurting the economy. The governments around the world are trying to increase unemployment to get that to some sort of normality. And we're seeing it. I think every employer now is seeing it. I mean, there is definitely massive layoffs going off. People might not be talking about it, but people are definitely laying people off, and we're starting to see less arrogance in the employment market.
Now, this clip has gone viral because rarely do you hear as explicit an admission that the interest of bosses is so wildly contrary to the interests of not only workers, but of the economy as a whole. Saying we need to ruin the economy, we need to increase unemployment by 40–50% so that workers know that it's the CEOs who are in charge, that the CEOs are valuable, and not them and not their labor. This is really down the rounds. What do you make of this?
Who is this guy?
So this guy,
I have literally no idea who this is.
Ironically, given how incredibly controversial the sky-high housing costs are right now, this guy is a property developer who was giving the speech at a property summit. He probably did not realize, or if he knew he was being filmed, didn't think that this was going to be a clip that was circulated all around the world that went super viral, and got a little too honest, and a group of his peers that I'm sure all agreed with him in the room. But the reason that you've heard of this guy before, outside of just being a rich guy who is made his wealth from extracting value out of the housing market, this is the guy that famously became a meme after he castigated millennials for buying too much avocado toast, arguing that the reason why we couldn't afford houses, an entire generation of people worse off than their parents' generation for the first time in American history, the reason was we were buying too much avocado toast. He told 60 Minutes back then in 2017, when I was trying to buy my first home, I wasn't buying smashed avocado for $19 and 4 coffees at $4 each. So this is part of why it's so much schadenfreude. Here is someone who is saying that the individual actions of people who are spending too much money on $4 lattes is why we have these huge systemic failures of the economy and runaway inflation in various sectors like housing, at the same time that he, through his business practices, are likely contributing to the housing squeeze, and at the same time that he's openly admitting that he is able to succeed. Business owners like him, CEOs, corporatists, are only able to succeed when they crush labor, drive people into unemployment, and are even willing to threaten the economy of nations themselves.
Sure, it's definitely not people eating too much avocado toast that means they can't afford to buy houses. We need, I say it on the show a lot, we need to legalize housing. We need to build more housing. I don't know what his contributions are there on that front, but that requires policy change. There's all sorts of policies that make it extraordinarily difficult to build dense housing, tall buildings. Neighborhoods always fight redevelopment. The historical preservation insanity. It's the worst thing that could ever happen to a property you own is to have it declared historically significant, because then you can't sell it and you're screwed. So I would, like to change all those policies. Obviously, the things he's saying about, crushing workers are not kind or good things to say either. We don't want to make unemployment worse. I don't think anyone really wants
But they
that.
do. And the thing is, remember, he's not the only one saying things like this. I believe it was Larry Summers who was making the case in the middle of the pandemic that unemployment needed to go up, that we needed to cancel a lot of the pandemic-related policies that were keeping people afloat because those were the ones that were causing inflation. I mean, he's being really honest about something here.
Well, I mean, I
just
support
that the people
canceling
who
those
run
policies,
the economy know that there's a direct trade-off between their ability to extract profit from a labor force and scarcity, the idea that workers need jobs, are going to starve in the street if they don't have them, are willing to work for less, are willing to do anything. And that's why there has been this iconic, classic battle between labor, the interest of labor that is represented by labor unions, and the bosses. We talk about millionaires and billionaires as though wealth is coming from the sky, that it's not a zero-sum game, that people like Bill Gates or Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, that money is just because they worked their brain so hard and they were such geniuses that it just came to them magically. Well, what we're really seeing is that, as you were pointing out, policy choices to pay workers less. Right now, we're on the brink, we're going to talk about this in a different segment, of this United Auto Workers strike, where they're pointing out that adjusted for inflation over the last, I believe, 40 years, their pay is down 30%. Meanwhile, the CEOs with unprecedented profits have given themselves a 40% raise. There's a relationship between those two things, a choice to invest in stock buybacks, a choice to pay out to shareholders in dividends instead of investing in the company itself, or in investing in the workers themselves whose labor enabled them to sell those cars and make those profits in the first instance. And when people like this say something like this out loud, it's a moment for the American people to realize that even though the media often tries to frame the interests of workers as antithetical to their own, oh my gosh, the price of cars is going to go up, et cetera, oh, you're not going to be able to ride the trains because there's a railroad strike, or you're not going to be able to get your packages because there's a railroad strike or a UPS strike. The reality is that those strikes of yesteryear, including auto worker strikes in the past, bring up the entire labor market for across the country. Because once there are large sectors like that are paying their workforce more, everybody else is forced to compete and raise wages to compete for those same laborers to work at their companies. And that's what they don't want to happen. They don't want you to be in a good bargaining position as a worker, regardless of whether you actually personally work at an auto plant or UPS. They know that there are these broad systemic effects on the whole community. So they relish an opportunity to gain back power, to squeeze workers by diminishing wages, by attacking labor unions, by attacking people's ability to bargain collectively, to do union busting activities and the like. Because at an individual level, yeah, a person does have to bend the knee and do what they got to do to feed their family and survive. But collectively, through the power of withholding your labor as a group, you can put these people in a tough spot, the likes of which he's complaining about in this clip.
I don't have any problem with that. People have every right to advocate for better pay individually or collectively, and that's fine. So they can get after it.
Regrettably, people don't.
In the private sector, I oppose this in the public sector, but
regrettably, people don't actually have those rights. As you mentioned, public sector's employees are largely stripped of their ability to collectively bargain. Absent the NLRB and the establishment of a legislative board that is protecting the labor rights of laborers, what you did get was very effective union busting activities.
What do you mean by union busting activities?
Well, it can range to a whole lot of things. It can mean firing people who try to join a union. It can mean shutting down an entire workplace, like Starbucks has done, shutting down an entire restaurant as a consequence. No, I don't think that they should be allowed to do that. Well, if they want to do that, then Starbucks workers can ban across the country, as they've been doing, and walk out in a massive way. Sure. We used to have people talking much more full-throatedly about general strikes, where people across sectors in the labor force realize that if they don't stand together, bosses will engage in exactly those kinds of activities. And in a different time in American history, under FDR, the most popular president in American history for exactly these kinds of reasons, he established a mechanism in the government to protect the rights of labor and labor interests.
This doesn't sound like protecting rights. This sounds like tilting the playing field to their advantage by making it so they can't be fired.
The human beings that participated in democracy, that comprise the labor force, that are the average American, all got together and elected a president and pressured a president who would establish those rights for themselves. Yes, I don't know if you think that rights like come from the sky and are
they're inalienable and they are granted to us by virtue of existing.
No, men wrote the Bill of Rights. They made a decision about what we wanted to value as a society. And in the 1940s,
Americans... This is the positive rights, negative rights distinction.
Yeah, and in the 1940s,
you can't have a right to something that someone else has to provide because then it's an obligation on them to be enslaved by you.
In the 1940s, the society came together and decided that we wanted to live in a country that protected and valued labor and the average American worker over greedy CEOs who were extracting their labor and willing to have their hands cut off by machine and send them out in the street, unable to work another day in their life. That's why we have labor protections. That's why we have OSHA protections. That's why we have a 7-day work week. That's why we have certain paid leave policies, although they're much worse than most other similarly situated and advanced countries around the world. And so I think this is an incredible teaching moment. It could not be better timed, given where we are in labor history on the precipice of this UAW strike, in the middle of these Amazon strikes and Starbucks worker strikes, et cetera. Because the gap between worker pay and CEO pay has ballooned over the last 50 or so years at the same time that there have been these attacks against labor power that are bipartisan, largely conservative, but the Democratic Party has been no friend to labor in a meaningful way for the last, I would say, 40 or 50 years or so. So in the 1960s, the gap between CEO pay and worker pay was about 30-1. Today, it's almost 400-1, and it's because the workers are getting a smaller and smaller piece of the pie. They've had less and less of an ability to fight for more because largely Ronald Reagan, during that era, stripped away so many union protections that they used to be able to rely upon.
Okay. Well, according to new data from the United States Census Bureau, the child poverty rate rose from 5.2 in 2021 to 12.4% in 2022 during the time of the expiration of pandemic-era benefits, and the overall poverty rate rose by 4.6% in 2022, the first increase since 2010, according to The Hill. Now, yesterday's census data also showed a 2.3% drop in median household income from $76,000 in 2021 to $74,000 in 2022. Real median earnings for both part-time and full-time workers also dropped over the last year by 2.2%, according to the Washington Post. Yeah,
those are numbers that Biden is going to have to contend with as he's trying to make this pitch to the American public, that the economy is doing well, actually, that things are good, actually. And look, I don't want to be dishonest here. Even though I think that many aspects of the economy were better under Donald Trump, largely that wasn't his doing. These things ebb and flow. Joe Biden isn't responsible for a pandemic having existed, and he's largely dealing with the consequences of that. But the Democrats have to reckon with the reality that people's quality of life is lower than it has been in the past. Child poverty is higher than it has been historically. Housing costs are a bigger portion of the average American's budget. I think like the bulk of Americans are now paying something like over 40% of their incomes to housing costs. I've said this statistic a lot of times that there's not a single place, a single district in America where someone working a minimum wage salary, $40 a week, can afford a one-bedroom apartment. I mean, these are really dire times. And you can't just say, I'm doing better. You have to make a pitch to the American people about how you're actually going to dig them out of what really feels like a crisis for a lot of folks.
All right, we need to change these policies and build more houses. We need to make it easier to get a job, not harder. We need to make it, instead of having more and more hoops to jump through the education system or the licensing system or all of those things, that seems like the easiest way to me, have less distance between people and the thing they want, whether it's a house, a job, an education. Just like legalize it, like allow people to provide these services and people to take advantage of it. Like people on their own coming up with arrangements that are mutually beneficial works and has worked historically, and we've just like utterly broken that in this country. In a way, none of our peer countries break these things. We have less free economies than our neighbors to the north and many of our peers in Europe. We overly credential and license everything, and it's totally broken.
Yeah, well, you know, everyone knows I worked for Bernie Sanders in 2020. Part of why was he was going to establish a national right to housing. He was going to build 10 million permanently affordable housing units.
Who,
do exactly what you're describing.
He's gonna get out there with the. The hard hat. And
what is this argument? Are you not familiar with government issuing contracts to build any number of things across the country, roads, bridges, et cetera? Yes, he was going to. You do what the government does, which is contract people to build 10 million new affordable housing units, in addition to reforming a lot of our Section 8, the existing Section 8 system. And I think that wasn't a part of the campaign that got emphasized enough. But he was doing exactly what you're describing needs to be done, which is to increase the housing supply in a dramatic way and really do what other countries like, frankly, Singapore do, where the housing costs are really high, but a lot of people live in government housing because they recognize the problem and provide it for people to have a baseline standard of living.
The government doesn't need to build housing or even order people to build housing. It just needs to get rid of the rules that make it impossible to build housing and allow for more labor so that housing can be built. We have a labor shortage in that area.
Well, stick around. We're going to continue to get into a little bit more of this, these labor issues that are really coming to a head here in the United States right now, with the UAW strike in particular. More Rising right after this.